Kesubos Daf Mem Zayin contains 6 different discussions about the rights that a father has in his daughter and that a husband has in his wife. The Gemara will go through 6 of these different sugas, give the source for each of them, and a machlokes in several of them. So let's begin. The first one on the list is that of Ma'aseh Yadayim. We know that a father has the right to his daughter's profits that she earns. So the Gemara says, where do you see that? So the Gemara is going to try 2 sources for this. The Gemara first brings from a pasuk that says, discussing the father's right to sell his daughter who is a ketana as an amma. It says, V'chimkar ish es bitay la'amma. So it puts bitay together with amma to link the two. Just like the profits earned by an amma go to her master, the profits earned by a daughter go to her father. So the Gemara says, that's good for a ketana. Father has the right to sell his daughter who is a ketana. And this pasuk is talking about a sale of a daughter who is a ketana. But we'd said that the halach is true, that he even collects the profits earned by his daughter when she's in Nara, between the ages of 12 and a half. So how do you see that? This pasuk is only talking about a ketana. So the Gemara is going to try a couple of approaches to explain this. The Gemara first wants to say that the reason must be because the father has the right to give her over in marriage. Now, we've seen that he has the right to because he says as Biti Nasati Leish Hazeh in the parsha of Ma'aseh Shemra. So how does he have the right to give over his daughter in marriage if he doesn't own her profits? During the time that he's giving her over, he's going to take away from her ability to work. Now, if her ability to work belongs to her and her profits belong to her, how does he have a right to stop her from working during that time? So the Gemara says that's not a kasha. It could very well be that he will give her over in marriage without making her lose anything. Either he's going to pay her for her lost time, or he'll marry her off at night when she's not working anyway, or he'll marry her off on Shabbos and Yantiv when she's not working anyway. So that's not a kasha. So therefore we're back to our question, how do you know that the father has a right to the work of a daughter when she's in Nara? So the Gemara answers the reason is because there's no chiddush in the pasuk if it was talking about a ketana. The father has a right to sell his daughter as a ketana. That means he has a right to give over her Ma'aseh Yadayim to her master. He certainly therefore must own the Ma'aseh Yadayim of a ketana. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that. Pasuk must be talking about something else which is a chiddush, and that's a nara, because the father doesn't have a right to sell his daughter when she is a nara. Okay, that concludes that discussion. Now the Gemara says, what is the source of the right that a father has the ability to be meifir neder, to cancel the vows of his daughter when she's in Nara? The Gemara says that's because the pasuk about Hafaras Nedarim specifically says Binurei Beisavia. It explicitly says that he has that. Next, the father is one who receives a get, a document of divorce that's given to her from Erison. Where do you see that? The Gemara says that's because it says V'yatza v'haisa v'yatza it links, it says v'yatza mi beisa v'holcha v'hoisa l'shacher. It links v'yatza and v'hoisa. It links divorce and marriage. We've already seen in the last daf that the father has a right to arrange her kiddushin, therefore link that to get. He also has a right to accept the get for her. Next halacha we had seen is that the father does not take profits accrued from property that she owns. That's property that she inherited from her mother, and therefore belongs to her and not to him. And he has to return that to her when she leaves, and he doesn't get to take any profits from it while she's in his rishus. So the Gemara here quotes a machlokes, a brisa which brings a machlokes about this halacha. Does the father have the rights to the profits of the property owned by his daughter or not? So the Gemara brings that it's Rabbi Yosi, Bar Yehuda, and the Chachamim. Now, about the husband, they both agree that he has a right to the profits of the property that she brings into the marriage. She has nechsei son barzel, which he must return to her at the end of the marriage in the same value as it was when she brought it in. But he gets to use the property while she's in the marriage. Now we know that he has the right to that, and everybody agrees to it, and the reason is because he has to redeem her if she's captured. In exchange for his promise, for his obligation to redeem her, he has the right to use her property, and therefore he's going to redeem her even if the cost will be greater than all the value he got out of her property, because it's an exchange. He commits to redeem her, she commits to let him use her property during the time that they are married. Now, the machlokes is if the same logic applies to a father or not. So Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda says yes, the same logic applies to a father. We want the father to redeem his daughter as long as she's in his rishus as well. The Tanna Kama says no, the father's going to redeem his daughter anyway. You don't need to bribe the father to redeem daughter by allowing him to use her property. We assume that the natural connection there is going to be sufficient that he'll redeem her even for a great expense. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, no, you have to give him that property as well, because he may say, look, she has her own property, let her take the money bag that she has and redeem herself. Okay, now we go to the next halacha, which is now we're moving on to the rights that the husband has. So we said that the husband does have the right to the accrual, the payros, the income that is generated by the property that she brings into the marriage. The Gemara is going to discuss a machlokes about a slightly different sugya, and that's what happens if a marriage never makes it past Erison. You have a kiddushin that happens, the husband and the wife do kiddushin, but somebody dies before the nisuin occurs, one of the two. So the Gemara quotes a machlokes first about what happens if he dies, if she dies, that is. This is a machlokes between Rabbi Nassan and the Tanakama. The Gemara wants to make that based on a different machlokes about what happens when he dies. That's a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim. So the machlokes between Rabbi Nassan and the Tanakama in a brisa is what happens if the father grants the husband a significant chunk of property greater than what he has to. He gives property for her to take into the marriage as part of the nadan, the dowry. She brings that into the marriage with her. He promises that to her, and he makes that promise at the time of Kiddushin. But the marriage never goes past Kiddushin. She dies earlier. The question is, did the daughter own that property, and therefore her husband inherits it? Even though they never did Nisuin, and it was her husband in a Kiddushin, so her husband inherits it. Did he promise it? Did the father promise that to her, and therefore to him from Kiddushin already? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Nassan says, yes, he did. And the Chachamim say, no, he did not. It doesn't go. It goes back to the father. Now the Gemara says, let this be dependent on the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. If he dies, what's the sugi of heir? If he promised her in the ksuba, he gave her a ksuba at the time of Kiddush, and he promised her more than the standard required 100 zuz to a bu'ula and 200 zuz to a b'sula. Does she have a right to collect that extra? Let's say he promised her 300 zuz. Does she have a right to collect the extra if the marriage never made it past Kiddushin because he died first? What did he intend to promise her? Only because he intended to promise her that it should be hers for the marriage, if a marriage happens, or did he promise it to her even just in the merit of their being mikudeshes? So there, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says she gets everything because he wanted to give her everything even if they never got married, and the Chachamim disagree. They say no, he didn't want to give her anything unless the marriage actually happens. The Gemara also says that you have the same machlokes. One's talking about where he dies, one's talking about where she dies, but the question is, was the extra promised for the Kiddushin or only on the condition that the future Nisun is going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, then it never makes it there. So the Gemara says not necessarily are these two machlokes independent on each other at all. It could be that even Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says that the husband did not intend for his wife to get the extra ksuba, does agree that the father did intend for the husband to get the extra nadan that he promised as part of the Kiddushin package. And that's because the father gets something, he gets a benefit out of the fact that he's in a marriage discussion with this chassan. And he gets a credit from it. That's something that's important to him, and therefore, just in the merit of that, he's willing to promise the husband. He has no reason to promise extra ksuba. He only wanted to promise ksuba because he wanted to marry the lady. If he never ended up marrying the lady, that promise is void. The Gemara now brings a brisa which lists 3 obligations that the husband has in exchange for 3 rights that he has. The Gemara says which one pairs up with which one is in exchange for which. So the 3 obligations are mizonos, his obligation to financially to support his wife and to give her food. Kavura is his obligation to bury her and to pay for her funeral after she dies. And pirkon is his obligation to redeem her if she's captured. The 3 things that he gets in exchange for this are ma'asidayim, her income that she works, her ksuba that refers to property which she brings into the marriage that she owned before the marriage or that her father gives her as a nadan that she brings into the marriage and he inherits, belongs to him after the marriage and after she dies, And of course, her property that he gets to use that stays her, and he has to give it back to her after it dies or goes to her inheritors, so separately from his, but he gets to use, to eat the fruits of, to gain profit of, to gain the usage of while she has them, while they are in the marriage. So the Gemara says that the Vaisidaim are in exchange for the Mazonos. The Gemara first leaves out the Peiros and the Pirkon from the Brisa. The Gemara says you got to add it back in because the last line of the Brisa makes no sense, because it says, therefore the husband eats the fruits. So the Gemara says, what do you mean, therefore the husband eats the fruits? What does that have to do with anything? So the Gemara says, we mean to say is that because we want husband to redeem his wife, therefore we tell him to get the fruits. The Gemara says, you may think that he should leave the fruits, meaning he should leave the income, not touch it, and then use that to redeem her. The Gemara says, it's better off this way, because sometimes the price of redemption will be greater than the payers that he got, and then he won't want to pay it. So like this, if he just got a lot of profit from her property and doesn't know exactly how much, he's just going to pay it out of his own pocket to redeem her, even if it doesn't necessarily add up. So how do you know which one is for which? Maybe the mizonos that he has to support her is in exchange for eating her fruits, and maybe the maisidayim that he gets, that's in exchange for the fact that he has to redeem her. It's not logical to pair those up. We should do what happens often in common in exchange for what happens often in common. The most common thing is that he has to feed her, and that's in exchange for the most common thing, which is that she works and then she gets profit. Now, the pirkon that has to redeem her, that is going to be in exchange for something which is not so common, and that is the payros of her property. She doesn't usually bring property into the marriage. And it's important to know what is in exchange for what, because she has a right to pull out. She has a right to cancel. This is an arrangement that is offered to her. She has a right to say, I'm going to keep my own maisidaim. So then, what right does she lose in exchange for that? Is it the right to mizonos, or is it the right to be redeemed? It's important to know that it's the right to mizonos. Gemara now goes into the pasuk that lists the obligations that a husband has to his wife, and that is the three things: she'er, ksus, and ona, all listed in the obligations that a master has to his Avriya when his son marries her. But we learn from there to all marriages. And Gemara wants to know, what are these three things? What's she'er, ksus, and ona? So the Gemara is going to bring a Raisa with three opinions as to how to explain this. Everybody agrees that ksus refers to clothing. That's what the word ksus means. He has to give her clothing. The question is, what is she'er and what is ona? So the first Tana says that she'er is food, and you see that because the Torah says, "Ba'asher achlu she'er ami achlu she'er." You see, food is called she'er. Ona, he says, that refers to the obligation for a husband to be with his wife, which is referred to as ona, meaning from time to time he has a recurring obligation not to let her go too long without paying physical attention to her. Now, the second, the source for that is that it says imtane as benosai, which is referring to depriving them of tashmish, and he uses the word ona tane to refer to that. Now, that's a Tanakama. Rabbi Elazar says it's the other way around. She'er refers to ona, like it says, Isha shall call she'er b'sar l'sikru l'galos erva. So you see, marital intimacy is referred to as she'er. It says she'er b'sar, and it's talking about the Gili Arayis. And ona, that is referring to food, because it says Vayan chavi arivecha, and that's referring to the man that Hashem fed us. It's called ino, it's called yan. Now, the third approach does not understand she'er or ona as referring to these things specifically. He understands it as explaining the type of ksus, the type of clothing that he has to give. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. He says she'er ksusa is to teach you that her clothing has to be appropriate for her age. Can't give child's clothing to an older woman, can't give old woman's clothing to a child. Rashi explains that a older woman needs lighter clothing. She can't bear the weight of heavier clothing, and a younger woman needs heavier clothing because it looks more beautiful. She can't have old, worn out clothing, and she's more concerned about her appearance. Now, then it says ksus v'ona, so that shows that the ksus has to match the ona, has to match the season. Can't give her winter clothing during the summer, or summer clothing during the winter.